A study was just published that says FIFA's player ratings correlate directly with racial stereotypes, and that black players are commonly much faster and stronger while being less technically gifted and intelligent. Now, this is a loaded accusation, and there's a lot of potential contributing factors to this, and I promise you we're gonna unpack all of this. The study focused on FIFA 20 and took a look at the top 88 players in the game and broke down their attributes. These were the final results of the study, with a massive difference noticeable in pace, physicality, sprint speed, jumping, and strength, with less noticeable and yet still existing differences in more technical attributes like ball control, free kick taking, and player vision, with the former favoring players of a darker skin tone and the latter favoring players of a lighter skin tone, as you can see because you can probably read. FIFA immediately released a response to this that is probably obvious if you were paying attention. The study only focused on the top 88 players in the game, so FIFA's response zeroed in on 2 points. First of all, that the study does not control for position, and obviously the position of a player will often determine the kind of sprint speed that they're going to have. Dan James does not equal Willie Orban. But furthermore, the study accounted for 88 of approximately 17,000 players found in FIFA 20. That's a fair point. If anybody's ever taken a statistics class, they know that this is not a significant sample size. But it's time for me to come clean here. Before I made YouTube videos, I actually went to school. Yay. Yeah. Woo! I mean, honestly, what did you think I used a head this big for? It's not just empty storage space. I went to grad school and I wrote a paper about subconscious bias in sports. And even though this is not a large sample size that this study used, it does actually report on a problem that exists all over the place. Here, look, racial bias in football commentary. This is a statistically significant study that I used to write that paper 2 years ago. This is right around the time that FIFA 20 was being created, which is of course what was studied in this particular breakdown. And now the findings in racial bias in football commentary, the pace and power effect, nice catchy title, gotta love academia, are actually really alarming. Well, essentially every commentator surveyed had no explicit racial bias that they disclosed. 62.6% of praise was aimed at players with lighter skin tones when it came to intelligence, while 63.33% of criticism was aimed at players with a darker skin tone when it came to intelligence. Commentators talking about power were 6.59 times more likely to be talking about a player with a darker skin tone, 3.38 times more likely to be talking about a player with a darker skin tone in reference to speed. When commentators talked about work ethic, 60.4% of praise is aimed at players with lighter skin tone. This is a massive difference, particularly on speed and power. And just look at the likelihood to comment on the athletic abilities, power and speed of darker skin tone players in relation to lighter skin tone players. If this is pervasive in football commentary, which is what is presenting the sport to the world, it is pervasive everywhere. But what's so striking about this study combined with the FIFA study is that nobody is consciously doing anything. These are, according to what people are disclosing, entirely unconscious, subconscious biases that persist inside of sport. And this isn't just like a UK issue either, obviously. There's another study written about the huge basketball tournament in the United States called March Madness that essentially found the same thing when it came to commentary. Now, this was authored by Rayshawn Ray, who I had the privilege of interviewing while writing my paper, and another professor's last name was Foy. And they juxtaposed two commentator clips to illustrate this for everybody. Two players with the exact same height and athletic profile that were both described as good rebounders, players that could go up and get the ball after a missed shot if you don't know basketball. I'll let you figure out which one has a lighter skin tone and which one has a darker skin tone. These are the direct quotes. We've talked about Matt Howard and how crafty he is, Jim. Shire's much the same way as a perimeter player, knows how to use that height at 6'5" very effectively to get into the lane. The second one, here comes streaky, sneaky Willie Veasley, a terrific offensive rebounder for his size, and he just weaseled his way to the basket. This study found that while it wasn't often direct references to intelligence, the contrast they drew was between crafty versus sneaky. Now, crafty being the intentional use of intelligence, and sneaky this like animalistic quality. Sociology's wild to me how they can find this stuff, but they do. And when these studies came out, there was an article in the New York Times written about intelligent or strong study finds bias in soccer broadcasts. These two large studies combined show that there is a clear subconscious bias based off the skin tone of an athlete, which FIFA's ratings reflect. And then this becomes a vicious cycle, obviously, because then you play FIFA, and then the black dude's faster all the time. You understand what's going on here. But there's another important direction to go with this. Because if you're sitting there thinking, well, subconscious bias isn't all of it. Players with darker skin tones are just faster sometimes. Well, there's a reason for that, and it comes from Soccernomics. Soccernomics is an excellent book that breaks down the sport and reasons that things happen using analytics. And the way Soccernomics explains why different countries are capable of producing different types of players, it's what you prioritize in your production of talent. For example, if you grow up in a area where there's a terrible field and a terrible ball, and the infrastructure of your country is not quite as good, which is often the case in West Africa and non-first world countries, then you are going to be more successful if you're more athletically dominant, because the field and the ball don't allow you to display your technical ability. So then you get better coaching, you get in better teams, and become the best player from that area because you were prioritized early based off of your physical dominance. This actually happens in the United States too, and Soccernomics talks about this. Or in the United States, even if you're U11, winning is the only thing that matters, and physical ability comes in before technical ability. So physically dominant kids get the best coaching, they get on the best teams, and they end up being the best players from the country because winning is prioritized when you're 10 years old. And this is also a self-perpetuating system, because when you see people from your country that look like you doing something a certain way, you want to emulate them. If you grow up in Brazil, you want to be Ronaldinho. You see the flair, you see the technique. If you grow up in the United States, you want to be Pulisic. You see the hard running, the long, explosive sprinting. And there is a final aspect to this, and that is slight physical differences that can contribute minorly. And I want to emphasize that because I don't want anybody latching onto this like it is the major reason for all of this. But minorly, at a world-class level, can contribute to physical difference in performance. Now, Ken Van Summeren, who's the director of sports science at the English Institute of Sport, is who we're going to be referencing here. And he sums this up very well. He says, the closer towards elite you get, the closer towards the limits of performance, so genetic makeup may well put some glass ceiling in there. But this is a very small glass ceiling with a lot of variance. What he's talking about is something called quick twitch muscle fiber, which West African descendant people have on average a slightly higher amount of quick twitch muscle fiber. But Van Summeren's very quick to point out that obviously when you look at the sprinters at the Olympics for the 100-meter dash, there are typically no representatives from West African countries, while Jamaica, which has a heavily West African descendant population, is very well represented there. In the United States, whose African-American population is often derived from West Africa, also has a very strong presence there. Because, and I quote from Van Summeren, they have role models and opportunities. It's a fun, sociable, and competitive event from a very early age. And it has great rewards, both financial and social. So if you're right up at the top of the game, that small genetic difference can make a pretty big difference when you're talking about 0.0 whatever running the 100-meter dash. But when you're talking about FIFA and football and soccer and being fast and strong or smart or not, this has absolutely no bearing scientifically. If you need proof of this, we'll go to the one that is weighted over everything else that we can measure, the sprint speed. And if you look at a list of the average top sprint speeds this year, Mykhailo Mudrik's number 2, and Anthony Gordon is number 3. For those that are curious, Rudiger's actually number 1, which is cool. Mo Salah, Darwin Nunez, and Achraf Hakimi also cracked the top 10. If you want to look at the top sprint speeds around the world at any time, you have players like Erling Haaland, who's Norwegian, and Kylian Mbappe, who's half Algerian and half Cameroonian. And that Cameroonian ethnic set is actually separate than the West African one that is attributed with the slightly higher quick twitch muscle fiber, just in case you were wondering. This is the sort of thing I shouldn't even have to be Googling, but it's to make a point. And the point is that while the study was obviously too small, there is a clear issue in sport and the way we talk about sport that has to do with subconscious bias towards the skin tone of a player. And so hopefully this video helps. And now you can recognize the fact that Anthony Gordon is fast and that Antonio Rudiger is smart, but also very fast. You know, maybe Rudiger wasn't the best example because a few of these long shots, but it's time we balanced out the way that we talk about the game. If you enjoyed this deep dive and breakdown, please do subscribe to the channel. It means a lot. And if you want to just keep rolling, by all means, we've got a video right here about the collapse of the US national team. And it is interesting and involves college roommates and best men at weddings. It's complicated.